Hello everyone. Today we are going to embark on chilling journeys together. From past to present, we will listen to real horror stories that have taken place all around the world. These stories are filled with events that start on a dark forest road and turn into unforgettable moments. If you're ready, I invite you to hold on to your seats tightly because these stories filled with truths will send shivers down your spine and push your limits. Now, let our chilling journey begin. I was driving alone late at night, feeling exhausted after a long day. After dropping off my friends, I continued silently on my way. However, after a while, I realized I was drifting off to sleep. Despite all warnings, keeping my eyes open was becoming increasingly difficult. In a dark corner, the moment came when I felt I was about to doze off, but then a sound startled me awake. The car's engine was making a dull noise, and I was about to lose control. I snapped back to reality just in time and corrected the steering, but my heart was still racing. There was only a short time left until the next rest stop, and I struggled to make it there. I parked my car and took a deep breath. However, when I stepped outside, I was shocked. In front of my car, I noticed a tree blocking the road. Trembling, I approached the tree and saw that the thing my car had hit was a person. I knelt down and checked the person's pulse with trembling hands, but I felt nothing. The person must have been lost in the forest, and my car accidentally hit them. However, there was a doubt in my mind. There was something inconsistent with the fact that the person disappeared into the forest. I took a deep breath and pulled out my phone. I immediately called the police and reported the incident. Then I came to my senses and thought about what to do next. When the police arrived, I told them everything and felt like I was facing a first-degree murder charge. At the end of that night, the police concluded that it was an accident. However, I still had a sense of unease. It was strange how the person suddenly appeared in front of the car and caused me to lose control. Was it really an accident, or was it something else? Maybe there was a greater force in the darkness that we couldn't see, and I was just its pawn. Since that day, I have been afraid to drive at night because I will never fully know what woke me up in that dark corner and what was behind that tree. I always remember that horrific moment and just pray that I never encounter such a situation again.
I was on a long journey one lonely midnight with Emma. Suddenly, my car tire blew out, leaving me stranded on a dark roadside. I looked around helplessly, but there wasn't a single place emitting light nearby. Finally, I noticed a distant shining light. It must have been a gas station. I started walking, in darkness and silence. With every step, my heart beat faster because my instincts told me this place wasn't safe. As I approached the light, I saw that it was indeed a gas station with cars and people around. While I felt somewhat relieved, there was still a lingering sense of unease within me. Upon reaching the gas station, I entered. There was a man inside, old and with a mysterious demeanor. I asked for help, and he said he could assist. However, his manner of speaking unsettled me. His eyes were vacant, and his lips were trembling. I tried to quickly finish my business, but the man's peculiar behavior made me uneasy. I decided to return to my car, but at that moment, the man said something. "Let me take you there, all the way home." My heart almost stopped. How could he know where I was going? I thanked him politely and said I didn't need his help. However, he insisted, almost forcefully, trying to take me to his car. Just then, another car pulled into the station. The man stepping out of the car recognized me and immediately came over. "Emma, is that you?" he asked. He hugged me and escorted me to my car. The look of astonishment on his face relieved me because I felt the urgent need to get away from that mysterious man. Finally, I reached my car with the helpful man. Looking back, I noticed the mysterious man had disappeared. My heart continued to race because I was almost about to go with a stranger. This experience always reminded me to be a little more cautious. Help on the roadside isn't always innocent.
I had set out on a long journey alone with Jessica. I was headed to a job interview in a new city. With my GPS by my side, I hadn't been worried at all. But suddenly, everything changed. As I drove through a wooded area, my GPS suddenly stopped working. I panicked because there were no signs around, and there wasn't a single place emitting light nearby. Clueless about what to do, I just kept driving forward, hoping to find a way out. However, the road was getting narrower and darker. For a moment, I glanced around to figure out what was happening, and that's when I noticed a ghost town looming ahead of me. The town appeared deserted and abandoned, but I felt that something wasn't right. Taking heed of the warnings within me, I decided to leave the town. But unfortunately, when I turned back, I realized that the road had vanished. Panic set in, and I looked around, but there were no signs. I returned to my car and tried to restart the GPS, but still couldn't get a signal. Suddenly, I began to hear strange noises around me. I felt that something was moving among the bushes. My heart started racing, and I stepped out of the car to look around. But what I saw truly horrified me. There were a pair of bright green eyes scrutinizing me in the darkness. They were approaching step by step, and I was paralyzed. Unable to wait to see what it was, I jumped back into the car. I started driving forward rapidly, desperately searching for a way out. After a while, I noticed a light shining ahead. I drove desperately in that direction and finally emerged onto a main road. I breathed a sigh of relief because I had escaped. However, when I looked back, I couldn't see the ghost town that had been lost in the darkness. At that moment, I had doubts about whether that ghost town existed in my mind or in reality. Since that day, I avoid that dark forest road. The traces of those nightmare experiences still haunt me terrifyingly. However, after that experience, I am determined to always be more careful, because sometimes the journey is not just physical, but also a spiritual experience.
One night, I was returning from a long journey with my friends. The sky was pitch black, and as we drove along the roadside, there was a long period of silence in our car. Suddenly, my eyes caught the silhouette of a man hitchhiking on the road. I didn't want to stop, but something inside me seemed to compel me to help him. Eventually, I succumbed to the voice of my conscience and pulled over. After pulling the car to the side, the hitchhiker approached me silently. There was a look of gratitude on his face, but there was a strange glint in his eyes. This moment sparked concern within me, but I forced myself to speak up. "I'm traveling. I'll go wherever you're going," he said. His voice sent shivers down my spine. However, it was too late to change my decision. The hitchhiker got into our car and quietly sat in the back seat. As I drove off, the silence only amplified the anxiety within me. After a while, the hitchhiker broke the silence and started speaking in a strange manner. What he said seemed random and nonsensical. For a moment, I felt a wave of fear, but I tried to stay calm. However, when the hitchhiker suddenly leaned towards the window, panic surged within me even more. "Do you think you've reached the end of the road?" he said, smiling. My heart started pounding rapidly, and I hesitated for a moment. But at that moment, I made my decision and stopped the car at the next opportunity. The hitchhiker fell silent abruptly and just continued to look out of the window. I wanted to leave the car, but my feet felt as if they were glued to the floor. Eventually, I gathered my courage and jumped out of the car without looking back. I started running into the darkness of the forest. My heart was racing, and the darkness engulfed me entirely. In the silence of the night, I could only hear the sound of my own breath. However, after a momentary pause, a strange whistling sound was heard from behind me. I screamed in fear and disappeared into the depths of the forest. In the darkness of that night, I would never forget the terrifying moment I experienced with the hitchhiker, and perhaps that moment would truly be our last.
My eyes were fixed on the road as I drove through the darkness of a rainy night. The headlights of my car illuminated the rain outside, barely revealing the mist-covered road. I was hurrying to get home as quickly as possible. Suddenly, a silhouette appeared in the darkness ahead of my car. I approached swiftly and noticed a figure I didn't recognize. In that moment, I felt the urge to help. I wouldn't want anyone to be stranded on the road on a rainy and cold night. I quickly stopped my car and opened the back door. However, I could never have predicted the consequences of this decision. As the door swung open, the person sitting quietly and calmly inside filled me with a wave of fear. Their wet clothes seemed to merge with the cold enveloping their body. As I attempted to speak up, they were silently looking at me with an eerie glint in their eyes. "Do you know where you're going?" they said, unexpectedly, smiling. This question stirred a deep sense of unease within me. As I tried to understand what they meant, I was met with nothing but a fearful silence. I needed to get the car moving again. I had to get rid of this person. However, as I started driving forward, the person beside me broke the silence, saying that something was approaching us in the darkness. I froze at the impact of their words. I panicked and looked around, but could see nothing. Fear was the only emotion echoing within me. When I turned back to try to grasp the situation, the person had vanished. I rubbed my eyes and looked again, but there was no trace or sign of them. The fear inside me was escalating. I drove the car faster, needing to get away as soon as possible. Yet the terror I experienced in that dark night stayed with me all the way home. Every raindrop reminded me of the silent smile of that person. In the silence of the night, the traces of fear within me were still fresh and alive. And in the darkness of that night, I could never forget the secrets hidden behind the vague silhouette that appeared on my path.
I set out on the road on a winter night, with rain falling lightly. The headlights of my car illuminated the dark road, with raindrops gently shimmering. There was a strange unease within me, as if something was going to happen tonight. However, I didn't know what. The road was quite empty, there were no other vehicles around. This silence bothered me. Why weren't there any other cars? Questions swirled in my head. As I turned a bend, I suddenly came face to face with a figure in front of me. My heart was pounding as if it would leap out of my chest. As I tried to understand what was happening, the figure vanished suddenly, but I was still in shock. I stopped my car and checked around, but there was no one. I thought it could be a momentary illusion, but it was too realistic to be true. I continued driving rapidly, but the discomfort within me increased. After a few more kilometers, I noticed that my car's engine was making a strange noise. I panicked and checked, but couldn't see any issue. For a moment, I stopped and restarted the engine, but everything seemed fine. However, as I continued, the rain intensified and the fog thickened. I could now only see a few meters ahead. The fog enveloped my car, and strange sounds began to come from within. Along with the roar of the wind, I heard a strange whisper, as if someone was calling me. My heart started pounding rapidly, and I was drenched in sweat. I felt a hand reaching out from within the fog, but I couldn't see. I panicked and tried to start my car, but failed. I felt a sense of fear and helplessness within me. After a while, the fog slowly began to dissipate, and I looked around. I found myself in a deserted, overgrown graveyard. My heart was pounding as if it would leap out of my chest. How could this be possible? How could I suddenly be in a graveyard? With trembling hands, I got out of my car and looked around. The tombstones stared silently at me, as if they wanted to tell me something. Suddenly, a silhouette appeared next to a grave, startling me, but as I approached, what I saw froze me. There, standing like a ghost, was a child. He looked at me with vacant eyes. My heart was pounding as if it would leap out of my chest, and I recoiled with trembling hands. The child approached me and whispered quietly, "You found me." As I backed away in fear, I heard whispers behind me. I quickly got into my car and drove away, but the look in the ghost child's eyes still haunts me. And that night, along with the dark truths I encountered, I realized that no journey is safe anymore.
I was driving alone on a dark road illuminated only by the headlights of my car. After a long and exhausting day, I was on my way back home. The road was quite empty, and I was moving forward in silence. However, as I turned a bend, I was startled by the appearance of a ghost car in front of me. I quickly hit the brakes and tried to stop my car, but I was awakened by the inevitable sound of a collision. Suddenly, there was only darkness around me. I rubbed my eyes and looked again, thinking there was nothing there. However, I distinctly remembered the appearance of a ghost car in front of me. With trembling hands, I got out of my car and looked around, but I couldn't see a ghost car, only silence and darkness. As I tried to gather my thoughts, I wandered around a bit more. A sign standing by the side of the road caught my attention. It read, "Accident site, far." As my eyes wandered over this sentence, a momentary sense of horror gripped me. Perhaps the ghost car standing next to this sign is a ghost that emerged as a result of an accident that happened here years ago. Filled with these thoughts, I returned to my car. However, when I tried to start the engine, I noticed there was a problem. It stubbornly refused to start. Panic-stricken, I tried several times more, but to no avail. My heart began to race because I was stranded on a dark and silent road. Desperately, I began searching for help around, but I couldn't find anyone on this deserted road. I waited for hours, but still, there was no sign. There was only silence and darkness. I felt a fear and anxiety within me because being far from the accident site, could this dark journey be the end? Finally, after a long time, I saw the approaching headlights of a vehicle. I stepped out of the darkness to ask for help and headed towards the car. However, as the car approached, a wave of fear washed over me. Because the approaching car resembled the ghost car that appeared earlier, my heart was pounding as if it would leap out of my chest, but there was nowhere to run. When the car stopped, I rolled down the windows and looked inside, but there was no one inside, only silence and darkness. For a moment, I stood frozen, not knowing what to do. However, at that moment, I heard a voice, like a whisper, "If you're stranded here, there's no turning back." With that voice, a sense of panic engulfed me, and I turned back to escape. However, my car still wouldn't start. I closed my eyes and prayed, desperately waiting for help. Eventually, a light appeared in the distance. As it approached, I realized it was a rescue vehicle. When help arrived, they rescued me and took me away from the accident site. However, the terrifying experience I had that night will never be forgotten. And now, every night as I pass through that dark road, I pray to be far from the accident site.
In the middle of the road, as a resident of a distant town, I, Emery, experienced a moment in my life that I will never forget. On that dark and starry night, I set out on the road. The rain outside wiped the windows, and the sound from my radio was muffled and fuzzy. The road was quiet, with only the sound of rain accompanying me. Suddenly, the radio malfunctioned. All I could hear was a static noise. At first, I didn't think much of it, but the static suddenly turned into a muffled human voice. "Help! Please help!" The voice coming into my ears sent a shiver down my spine. Though the voice was muffled and fuzzy, it sounded like a cry full of pain. I panicked and tried to quickly turn off the radio, but that voice seemed to be etched into my mind. A few days later, I tried to act as if I had forgotten about that signal. However, the voice lingered in my mind like a ghost. It was as if it was calling me to answer to something. A week later, the radio malfunctioned again. This time, the voice was clearer and more distinct. "I'm here, still here." The voice frightened me as much as it aroused curiosity within me. Who was the owner of this voice? Why were they asking for help? Questions swirled in my mind. In my next attempt with the radio, the voice became even clearer. "Save me, please, help." I now wanted to pursue this voice. I needed to find out on which frequency it was. Throughout the journey, I scanned the radio. At one point, I caught the voice. However, there was nothing on that frequency, just static noise. I continued to listen to the radio at night. This voice had almost captivated me. The curiosity inside me now gave me an overwhelming urge. One night, the voice appeared again. This time, it was clearer. "They're coming. They'll come here. Help. Don't let go." Who were they coming for? Why did I need to be cautious? Questions were swirling in my mind. Now I felt a responsibility toward this voice. I had to help, but I needed to find out where the voice was coming from. About a month later, I stopped in a village near that town. The sound from my radio began to change strangely. Excitedly, I started walking towards a house in the village. However, the house was empty. I entered, and the radio began to play. The voice was now more distinct and clear. "This is it. They've arrived. Don't let go. Help." And at that moment, the door of the house slammed shut. When I turned around, I saw a group of people in front of me. Their faces were pale and their eyes were empty. I hesitated for a moment, but then I started running away in fear. But that voice was etched into my mind. That cry for help still echoed in my ears. And since that day, that voice has never left me.
My name is Alex. It was a dark and gloomy night. I was on a long journey all by myself. The sky was covered with pitch-black clouds, and there was hardly any moonlight. My car's headlights struggled to illuminate the road, and the fog made it even harder to see. The road was silent. The only sound I could hear was the faint rustle of the car's tires on the road. Fatigue and sleep deprivation were starting to take over me. However, at one point, I saw a silhouette on the road. Was it a person? Or just a figment of my imagination? I couldn't believe my eyes. The silhouette appeared in front of my car. It was rapidly approaching as if it were about to disappear. My heart started pounding rapidly, and I slammed on the brakes. When my car stopped, the silhouette vanished. I breathed a sigh of relief, but the fear continued to grow inside me. I continued on the road, but the shadow of that silhouette was still looming over me. Along the way, I saw dark figures suddenly appearing and disappearing. Each time, my heart felt like it would stop. I didn't know who they were or what they wanted. At one point, I saw a car on the road. Its headlights were flickering, and it was completely battered. As I approached, I felt a sense of unease. Seeing the car sent chills down my spine. As I approached the car, I saw someone. A man was standing in the darkness. His arm was covered in blood, and his eyes were empty like glass. I could hear his voice, but it was meaningless and garbled. "Help! Help! Before they come! Help!" The man's words confused me. Who was coming? And why did this man need help? However, my instincts warned me that I needed to flee. I returned to my car and quickly drove away. Along the way, I heard a strange sound from my radio. It sounded like a human voice, but muffled and unintelligible. Fear surged inside me, and I tried to turn off the radio, but the sound wouldn't go away. Finally, my journey ended after a long night. However, I would never forget that dark and gloomy night. The terrifying moments I experienced along the way felt like they would haunt me forever. At the end of my night journey, a part of me was lost, and I had entered a road of no return.
Years ago, with only me and my trusty old red car, I used to embark on long journeys quite often. In those days, navigation devices weren't common, so I usually relied on maps and road signs for my travels. However, on one unforgettable journey, I experienced one of the most terrifying moments of my life. It was a hot summer day, and I decided to go on another long journey. As I drove away from the city, I passed through vast fields with a unique combination of green and blue. Accompanied by an old song playing on the radio, I was having a peaceful journey. Midway through my journey, the sky suddenly darkened, and dark clouds covered the sky. I realized that a storm was approaching rapidly. Since my navigation device was out of charge, I started using the map as an alternative. However, luck was not on my side this time. I took out the map, and my eyes caught on something. The roads and signs that I clearly saw a few minutes ago on the map had disappeared. I looked around, and for a moment, I was frozen in shock. The trees on the roadside looked alike, and it was impossible to determine which of the gaps leading in every direction showed the right way. My sense of direction was lost, and there were no signs around me. The storm was approaching fast, and the thunderous lightning spreading across the sky was as powerful as one to make my heart skip a beat. I started to panic and felt more anxious than ever before. I stopped my car and got out, starting to examine the surroundings before the storm hit. However, no matter which direction I went, I encountered the same scenery. At one point, I heard the distant approach of a vehicle and ran towards it with hope. However, as it got closer, I recognized the car. It was my own. My eyes couldn't believe what they had seen. I wandered for hours, but every attempt led to the same result. The roads were lost, and the map had become useless. The storm was now approaching, and I still couldn't find my way. At that moment, I noticed that something was out there. Dark-colored figures, like shadows, were moving among the trees. My heart started pounding rapidly, and for a moment, I froze. Eventually, my instincts forced me to run back to my car. I closed the door, rolled up the windows, and locked myself inside. As the storm hit, the roaring of the wind and the sound of the rain drowned out the silence outside. However, the fear and anxiety inside me never diminished. I was trapped in my car for hours, desperately waiting for help. Finally, as the storm slowly subsided and the first rays of morning sun illuminated the sky, I began to examine my surroundings again. Eventually, a few kilometers away, I saw the lost roads reappear. I slowly drove my car and headed back home. However, I will never forget the horrifying night I experienced. Even today, I still don't understand why and how those lost roads appeared. Perhaps I was truly guided by a dark force that day, but maybe it was just the madness of nature. However, those terrifying moments will stay with me, haunting me forever.